just left Jitney. I went to see
Okay.
Wilson's play.
So you caught the
So I came out of there.
caught the matinee. Ran right
Came
over.
up and ran up 8th Avenue. I saw the bus.
In December 1964, Malcolm debated at the Oxford Union in England.
I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, "To be or not to be." He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. As you see, that's Malcolm, and welcome to Black History Month. We spent a whole 30 days, 28 days,
29 leap year.
and we talk about Black affairs. Well, we do that every week here anyway. But that's just to remind you the struggle, and Malcolm, he's at Oxford Union, mind you. This is at the tail end of his life. Matter of fact, he was murdered, what?
February,
2 months after that.
February 21st.
And this is December 1964. As you see, he's saying, I'll work with anybody. Even Donald Trump, I guess.
Maybe his father back then.
Oh, wow. You imagine? Well, Donald Trump might have wanted to be black back in those days, right?
That was another time.
Yeah.
I don't know if 64. 64 is probably a little early for that because then you're still dealing with the civil rights movement, and it's, all of its, 63 is the March on Washington. So the civil rights movement at that particular point is really gaining a lot of momentum. You've got younger people coming on. You've got the formation of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who were the foot soldiers. I mean, these were some folks, brothers and sisters who did a lot of work, and they don't necessarily get their due.
What were you doing in 64? As Malcolm was?
64, I was 15 years old. I was a teenager still. As a matter of fact, it's interesting because I lived in the Bronx.
All right.
And in order to kind of get some civilization, we had to go to Harlem all the time anyway.
Right.
So, I was preparing myself to go to one of the meetings of the OAAU.
Okay.
And I said, well, I need to go ahead and do this. I need to see Brother Malcolm in person. I'd seen him on television, of course. Things like the Mike Wallace Hate produced. Those particular things.
Yeah.
But at that point, I was ready to experience it for myself, and I was ready.
Okay.
So when the assassination occurred, I was shocked and disappointed, angered, just like so many other people.
I was a bit older than you. I gotten out of the service. I spent 60 to 64 in the Marine Corps.
Okay.
So when I came home, it was a different world.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't experienced all that struggle. I was at that war with the crackers in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
That was a real battle.
Yeah.
Boy.
But at the same time, when the order was given to integrate the services, and that was a major piece because that was one of the first agencies that went ahead and decided to integrate.
The Marine Corps?
No, the military in general.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
What's that, 48, 1948?
Yeah. Truman.
That's right.
And
That's right.
I think about, my father was in the war, and had talked about the things that he had to go through and the
Yeah.
things they had to go without, even to the point where when guys got wounded, the blood was given to the white GIs first. And then if there was any left, then the Negroes got blood. You know, all of the minutia behind segregation and classism. But even 64, you look at the March on Washington, was 1963.
That's right.
So this is a short period after the March on Washington. And I wanted to go to the march. I think you and I are about the same age. And my mother said, "You're not going nowhere." I said, "Mom, I want to go to the march." "Boy, you ain't going nowhere. You don't know what's going to happen down there. You're not going to Washington." So I had to stay home and watch it on television, you know. But that leadership that came out of the movement, that came out, as you mentioned, SNCC, the Black Panther Party, OAU, you know, it was like a hydra. There were so many different heads that J. Edgar Hoover was dealing with simultaneously in order to keep black people oppressed and suppressed. And when you look at history, J. Edgar Hoover was the biggest violator of the U.S. Code. He broke more laws of the U.S. Code than anybody in the history of the country.
And he was what he said, trans-dressed, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
He's a cross-dresser.
All different kinds of things.
A real piece of work. 37 years he ran the FBI.
Right. 30,
for 37 years. And kept the secrets on every...
37 or 47?
37. Kept the secrets on every president.
So they could never...
And kept them in line,
They could never move on him. They could never do anything with him except leave him in that position.
Well, I started off with Malcolm to show you one of our heroes. And as far as broadcasting is concerned, my hero is Gil Noble. And I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here if it hadn't been for Gil. I mean, he gave me the impetus to do anything when I saw what he was doing, man. And I admired and respected what he did. He gave us an imagery of a black man, the same as President Obama being president. Gil Noble was in front of the camera, and he gave it in such poise and grace and seriousness. The brother looked at you, and you know, he gave you that serious tone, and he presented the truth, our truth, such as great as Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben Van Sertimer, of course, Professor Jeffries, and our fellow travelers in African history. But let's play a little piece on Gil, the first one on Gil. And this is Gil's impression of Malcolm when he first became aware of what kind of man Malcolm was. You know, we all, I mean, I was older than you guys, so I didn't eat pork. I mean, I ate pork. So I didn't eat pork. I mean, I wasn't a Muslim, and I ate pork and chased the girls and did all sorts of
and made them cry.
Amazing things that we had to do in the 60s. I mean, all right, just play the piece and we'll come right back at you. Those are great days, boy, I tell you.
I got myself a job, and 2 years, a year after Malcolm was struck down at WLIB in Harlem, and then 2 years later, I was hired by Channel 7, not because of my skills, but because of the political pressure of the time.
Of the 60s.
Oh, there's no question. Because there were no people of color who were reporting, and the top story was us. And so these white reporters would be coming to Harlem, and the community began to say, "Get out of here.
That's right.
Don't come up here anymore because you're not doing anything but lying," you know?
So you were able to...
So I found myself employed. My first week at ABC, my first major assignment was the so-called riots in Newark. That was my baptism of fire, and I landed a permanent job. And then in '68, when Dr. King was struck down, a collective mantle of guilt fell over the United States, and a lot of things began to open up. And the local stations all decided that they were going to do what they had never done before, and have a black program. So channel 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13 all came up with one black program, and Like It Is was it for channel 7. And I was there, so I sort of straddled and did news reporting and weekend anchor, and I was also the co-host of Like It Is, still produced by whites.
Yes.
Written and produced by white people. But the host was Robert Hooks, the actor.
Isn't that something?
And I was the heavy. But then he got an offer to do NYPD 6 months later. He recommended that I succeed him as the host. Well, they were shaky about me because I didn't have visibility or anything. So they were about a year. There was a year where we had a number of co-hosts. I had a number of co-hosts. Melba Tolliver, Geraldo Rivera was a co-host and whatnot. And then finally they went their separate ways and I was there alone. But it still wasn't enough because I wanted to have more editorial say. And even though Like It Is was an improvement, I was hungry for more because my head was filled with what I had learned up in Harlem. And wouldn't you know it, but I eventually became the producer in 1975. And then I had what every journalist fantasizes about, and that is an opportunity to tell his or her own story based on their perspective. And that resonates with me today. I got some email this morning about a program we had on yesterday. And one of the viewers said, why don't you tell the other story? You know, why you always just tell one side? This is the other side.
Yes.
You know? But it's the socialization of this country. And so Like It Is has tried to do that, to tell the other side. This is the antidote. We're on 1 hour a week, and the 167 hours a week, and the rest of the broadcast week is all coming out of a white psyche.
Is there another program like It Is on television anywhere in the United States that is affiliated with a major network?
No, not that I'm aware of. This is it. And over the life of the program, we have the largest collection of moving picture images about our story on the planet. It's something I'm very proud to have been the doorman.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We were just talking about his history and all the archives that are just sitting there. We're waiting for Professor Jeffries, who has something, has some knowledge of where all these works are. And you've brought us a book today, and tell us about the book.
Well, I just brought, this is Gil Noble's autobiography, and it's called Black is the Color of My TV Tube. And I just brought it because you said you were going to talk about Brother Gil, and I said, well, you know, let me go on the bookshelf and, you know, go ahead and grab his autobiography and bring it and hold it up. Like Dr. Jeffries goes ahead and holds up books all the time. He's got his props.
Weekly listener.
So Jeff, and I've known you a long time. I know your things you do, so I brought a prop today also.
Tell us about the book.
Well, it's just an autobiography. It's interesting because it starts with the death of Brother Malcolm. Because...
like he started here.
Yeah, Brother Gil talks about the fact that, you know, he had never seen Brother Malcolm except on TV.
Right.
And, you know, didn't necessarily appreciate who he was until the assassination. And then when the assassination occurred, he decided to delve into Malcolm a little further. Then, of course, the autobiography comes out. I guess that would have come out probably the end of '65. So he reads that, and he sees it as a roadmap in regards to understanding our history. So he becomes a voracious reader. And, you know, he goes ahead and starts getting really, really versed in so much that, of course, he became a master of in regards to Like It Is. Because, I mean, when we saw Like It Is and some of the depth and breadth of the programs, I mean, it's just really amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to some people had to go to church, and other people had to go ahead and be home to see Like It Is.
Yeah.
But thank God you had a VCR and you could program your VCR.
Did we have one back then?
At some point, because I remember I used to tape them, you know, program the VCR to catch it if I was at church. But Gil always gave us the information that Associated Press and UPI never gave us.
Right.
Yeah.
So he was like a father, more like a mother hen, feeding the chicks every week, giving us that wisdom, that knowledge, and bringing people that had wisdom and knowledge to the table to present to the black community with regard to what was going on that wasn't being communicated. We didn't have social media. We didn't have computers. We didn't have cell phones, and there was no internet. So to catch that show and find out, outside of Ebony and Jet, what did you have?
Also, we have to give props to Brother Ilambe Brath.
Of course.
Because Ilambe, who he worked at ABC.
And he worked for a Gil show.
Well, it ended up that way because I think a lot of people don't know that Ilambe was talented. He was a talented graphic artist.
That's right, the graphic.
You know, he could draw. He did cartoons. I mean, he did all different kinds of things. I mean, amazingly so. But when Gil was there at ABC, Gil brought Ilambe over, and essentially, Ilambe became kind of like almost a producer.
Okay.
Because Ilambe's great connections with the African continent and
so
the
he was
African
bringing
leaders.
the people on the show?
He was bringing the people.
Okay.
Yeah, that was Ilambe Brath. You know, he's got to get credit for that because you know, he became an important part of Like It Is.
So
Very,
Van
very cool.
Sertimer, you know, and Dr. Clark. And
Well, you know, people like that, and Gil talks about it because one of the things that he used to do is that he used to go into Michaud's bookstore.
Okay.
And there you could see everybody because everybody was there.
That's right.
You know, everybody would come in, and you know, they would just be there all the time. You know, anytime you would go in, some scholar would be there, either you know, picking up some books or whatever that Mr. Michaud and his wife had, because that was the place to be.
Yeah, that's
You
right.
know, that was an amazing, amazing place, and many of us struggled because you know now the state office building sits on the site where the bookstore was.
Liberation.
And we went ahead and struggled, you know, to see if they could go ahead and move the state office building somewhere else, because we opposed it.
Is there any bookstore like that anywhere in America?
Maybe somewhere else.
The only one that I know of remaining is everyone's in Baltimore. On
Baltimore.
North Avenue West.
Nothing in New York City?
Nothing to that magnitude of what we had.
Or anything close to that?
He-Man is gone.
Nothing out in Brooklyn somewhere?
No, the bookstores that were in Brooklyn have closed. The only other big store is everyone's on West North Avenue, directly across town from the Blacks and Wax Museum in Baltimore. And you can get, I mean, the Archivist Handbook back in 1965. They have any book you're looking for from the period of black liberation. They've got it. And going back, all of J.A. Rogers' works, anything you can name, they have it down there.
You know, and Michaud's bookstore was spectacular in regards to what was there. You know, it was the people and it was the books. And he was very knowledgeable. He knew just about everything that he had in there. I mean, it was really, really amazing. And then, of course, you know, one of the things that happened is that outside the store is that speakers would be there.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
So,
right
you
on
know,
the
Brother
corner.
Malcolm would speak, and
Pork Chop.
you know, Pork Chop, Davis, you know,
Reverend
numbers
Kenyatta.
of other people. And I mean, it was very interesting because people from around the world knew that one of the places they wanted to go to Harlem.
Right.
And when they went to Harlem, one of the things they wanted to do was go to the bookstore. Fidel Castro, you know, he was right across the street.
That's right.
Right across the street at the Hotel Teresa.
Yeah.
He went to the bookstore. You know, everybody, Kwame Nkrumah, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, went to the bookstore. You know, all these people, and many of them had an opportunity to speak outside. And Mr. Mchawi had a mural outside the bookstore, an amazing mural that showed African people in you know, all of our colorations. And
that's before Ancestry.com and DNA.
oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, definitely, definitely. And I mean, it was just an amazing place. You know, if you went to Harlem, you had to stop there. That was the place to be. You know, that's before, you know, the Schomburg Library. Arturo Schomburg, his collection was there on 135th Street.
Schomburg?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I didn't know.
Arturo Schomburg.
Before he went up to 135th?
No, I'm saying at 135th. That's where he had his collection. And it was interesting because the New York Public Library bought this collection that Arturo Schomburg had. I mean, a lot of people don't know that Arturo Schomburg was Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, I mean,
right.
that's, you know, you tell people that he was Puerto Rican, and people that Puerto Rican say, oh, no, that's not possible.
No, he was.
But he was. And one of the motivations that he had in regards to his taking on this idea of collecting everything that he could find about African people is that one day in school, he asked the teacher, he said, well, you know, you always talk about what Europeans did. What did Africans do? And he said, well, you know, the teacher said, well, Africans have no history. And therefore, after that, Arturo Schomburg went on a mission in regards to going ahead and collecting everything that he could find about African people.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I had a co-worker years ago, Puerto Ricano, and he's a Taino. So his son one day used the N-word. And he, don't you ever use that word. He said, but that's them. He said, no, that's us. You're talking about us. Don't you ever use that word. He said, we are Taino, and we are tied to the African people. Their blood is our blood. And he started breaking down the history to his son. All right? And this was right after 9/11. But, and even Dr. Van Sertima, you know, the studies that he did. Oh, yeah. The transatlantic voyages, long before the Europeans, the Olmec in Mexico, all of that history. And you had mentioned before how various orators would show up at the bookstore. And the gathering of people for knowledge, as opposed to party and fun and
Entertainment.
nonsense and entertainment, the gathering, the quest for knowledge and information was so strong during that period because we were coming into our own and finding out who we were, you know, and the things that were going on in the continent, the things that were going on here, and also the things that were sparked in Europe. I remember that we had a celebration of the 30th anniversary of the Soweto Uprising at my church years ago, and people from the UN came from all over Africa and the Middle East, and Jonathan Butler was there, and he's from South Africa. But that uprising was sparked by what was going on here in the United States, and all that was taught and learned, and we see even today the revolutionary movement against Trump, you know, around the country. But those venues were the practices that we had years ago, which did change the face of history, which brought about, you know, by putting it right in the face of the oppressors, something had to be done, and it became something that was seen worldwide. And Gil used the medium of television to get it out across, not just across the country, but around the world, so that people could find out and learn.
Well, Gil mentioned that. I'm waiting for Dr. Jeffries to get here. Well, it's almost halfway through the show, so he should be here somewhere between halfway through the show and the end of the show. So what I wanted to show you before he gets here is what changed everybody's life. And it's, I often refer to him as our Black Jesus, you know, Martin Luther King. And at this time in our history when we have Jeff Sessions was just appointed Attorney General this morning. And now we have a Klansman as that first cop, federal AG, Attorney General. So look forward to martial law in Chicago, or with this nut we have in, well, we can't even call him nut. He's just very clever, a clever racist or bully. There's a lot of terms you can put to him.
You know, he has a certifiable personality disorder. I mean, there's no question about it.
Delusional.
I mean, and he suffers from narcissism. I mean, very, very clearly. I mean, that's why he can't apologize and why he has to go ahead and respond to everything that anybody says. Everything and anything, he's got to respond because that's his particular personality disorder.
All right. So as a remedy to all this, we want to give you a little presentation of Martin Luther King. I mean, he made all the struggle that, all the sacrifices for us. And let's play Martin Luther King. We'll come back. We're trying to teach Donald Trump love energy, because that's what it's going to take to get us out of this quagmire.
The swamp.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
You know, I guess I've played it so much now, it doesn't bring me to tears the way it used to. But I just study the results of this man's energy, the love energy that he projected all these years, and how, you know, I had been in Europe the year before this. 67 I spent in Europe, all right? Then I came back to America, man, and you know, over there, you've got a completely different kind of white person. you know, you don't have Trumps over there. I mean, you have real people, which I call them. And I spent it in Denmark, which was, and particularly, you know, be black in Denmark, you're a hero.
You got it made.
All right? And this is the 60s, mind you. Then I came back here, and all this stuff, and I couldn't believe it. And I lost my faith in the system, and I'm sure all of us were affected that way. But 2 years later, I got an affirmative action job, and I was in the corporate world, you know, like Gil after Martin died, after Malcolm died. They got better black representation. So when Martin died, affirmative action came in full force. So many of us that were experienced or had some sort of talent were catapulted to heights that we never dreamed of being to.
Well, you have to remember that, you know, we were talking earlier about the Kerner Commission report.
Oh, right,
and that,
right.
President Johnson had gone ahead and impaneled this commission to look at all of the urban disturbances, you know, what we call the rebellions, what they call the riots, because they were breaking out everywhere. Yeah. Stuff was popping off all over the place. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to look at the causes, and they wanted to look at some possible solutions. So this commission comes up with this report, 1968, and Johnson, when he sees it, he doesn't want anything to do with it.
Right.
I mean, it was, in terms of its vision, it was, I guess you have to say it was that radical. If you read it today, and it's interesting because it's very difficult to find it now. Mm-hmm. And you can, even online, sometimes it's difficult to find the entire Kerner Commission report. You can sometimes find chapters, but in terms of the entire report, sometimes it's very difficult to go ahead and get a hold of. But when you read that, you see that this particular commission had come up with some very creative solutions to many of the problems that the nation was facing in regards to this rising tide of resentment from African people here in America.
That was before Martin died.
Interestingly enough, if I remember correctly, the Kerner Commission report was March 1968.
Yeah, March.
Okay. March. And then Dr. King is assassinated in April. April 1968.
April 3rd.
And you had Patrick Moynihan's book also that he published that insanity with regard to the black community. But it is interesting how they can spend money on commissions. And as we said earlier, you know, Johnson didn't want to even get involved in this stuff. But his hand was forced in a number of ways to do. Being a Southern Dixiecrat, Adam Clayton Powell kept Johnson in check.
Yeah.
Because Adam controlled the Congress and wrote most of the legislation.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
So he said, Mr. President, you can't get A until I get B, C, and D.
Right.
And he was forced to sign the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. We had a man in Congress who leveraged his power and his authority over and against the president to bring about the necessary change, not what he wanted on a personal level, but what was morally right, not just ethically. And I was listening to Giuliani, they were talking about, you know, the thing with the Muslim ban and everything.
Yeah.
And Trump called Giuliani. He's the last person you call for guidance on law. The guy's incompetent. He got indictments, but he never won a conviction for the U.S. Attorney's Office. Never won a trial in the history of his career.
What about the mafia?
He lost all of those cases.
He did indictments, but he lost the trials.
All of those cases.
All right? I was involved in the case working on John Gotti in 1978, before you even heard of John Gotti. We were on his tail in 78. Giuliani is a nut, but Trump calls him for guidance in this ban on Muslims. So he said, and he let the cat out the bag, if you heard him. Well, how can we do this? How can we do this legally?
Right.
Morally, it's wrong. But law is about the ethics of the law. It may not be morally correct, but if you can ethically do it, you go ahead and do it anyway. And this is what Giuliani was talking about, how he was to help fashion this executive order to keep Muslims out, not because it's a matter of danger. The whole focus was the Muslims are the problem, just as they talk about black people as being the problem, and marginalizing black people, marginalizing the poor. Giuliani did it with the squeegee men on the street. You know, they weren't attacking anybody. but it became a crime to attempt to even wipe somebody's window because you're homeless and you're begging for bread. So here's a man that has no job, has no home. As opposed to begging, he's trying to do something of value just to maintain his dignity. To say that, well, I clean windows, but that's what I do. I'm not just begging. Giuliani made that a crime. And he brings that mindset, which is the same mindset that Trump has. How can we criminalize these people?
You have to say demonize even.
And
because it's
demonize
worse.
it. Right.
Because if you remember, in terms of making squeegee men illegal, there was the off-duty police officer who ended up shooting and killing a squeegee man. And of course, he didn't get convicted.
I don't remember that.
Oh, yeah. I remember. I remember very clearly.
Yeah.
He went ahead and shot
a squeegee man.
Yeah, shot somebody who was just going ahead and attempting to try to clean his windshield. And his defense was, as we hear all the time, he feared for his life.
Yeah.
But once you demonize someone, then of course that becomes a defense that makes sense to many people in the jury.
Well, in Black history, how do we remember Dr. King?
That's
Prince
a long,
of Love?
Yeah.
I mean, how can we encourage our populace today with the crackers we're facing now?
Yes, it's
Because we're going to the back of the bus again.
Yeah, well.
There is no bus.
One of the things, I think
martial law or something.
Yeah, we always have to remember about Dr. King is, people have issues in regards to his tactics. He was brave.
Yeah.
I mean, he was so courageous.
That's right.
I mean, unbelievably courageous.
Yeah.
Because you've got to have courage and you've got to be brave to go ahead and face some of the things that people in the nonviolent movement face.
I mean, how can you do that? I couldn't understand it.
No, listen, and many of us couldn't do it.
It's a call that was on him.
I could never do that.
Samson, everybody sees the movies with Samson. Samson wasn't a muscular guy. The scripture says when the Spirit of God came upon him, when the Holy Spirit came upon him, that's when he got his strength. He wasn't to cut his hair. Not that he was always strong. It says when the Spirit came upon him. Martin was one of those rare individuals that God had anointed with we're all anointed with a purpose and a task, but his was of a higher level. Not that he was perfect. He wasn't. He had his faults. But he had a calling upon him that, like Jesus, Jesus didn't want to die. And it's written in Scripture. He says, well, is there another way we can do this, Lord? If this cup can pass, because Jesus wasn't about dying. He didn't want to die the way of the Romans. But Martin, he did a speech called, I think it's called, Why Jesus Called a Man a Fool. And in it is a section on a knock at midnight when he was in Montgomery. And they called his house. He got this phone call, a call at midnight. And his wife, he said he had just put his daughter to bed, his wife was asleep, and he was up, and the phone rang. Nigga, if you don't get out of town, we're gonna kill your wife and your children. And he said he hung up the phone, and the phone rang again. And we're gonna bomb your house. And they kept threatening what they were gonna do. He says, and he tried to get a cup of coffee to settle his nerves. And he said he was 90 miles away from Atlanta. He said, I couldn't run home to mommy and daddy. I had to dig deep down in myself to see what was there. Was I gonna run or was I gonna stay? And that piece, that I'm gonna get you a copy of that. It is a powerful oration on the struggle that this man had within himself to do what he knew was right. But it is still the fear that comes and wrestles with us that can at times overtake us. And cause us to miss the call of our life. And that, Martin, he delineated that in that speech. And it really puts it in proper perspective. Because we can often criticize people and what they did and failed to do and should have, would have done and this and that. You talk to young people, they say, well, if I was living back then.
There he comes.
If I was living back then, I'd have done this. No, you would have done what every other Negro was doing at that time. But Martin was the one man. And then it gave a spark to another man named Malcolm. And there was a spark over in Ghana with Kwame. There was a spark with Patrice Lumumba. They were those little candles that were glowing in the darkness. It's not the masses. It's individuals that God picks out and ordains for that moment in time, like Barack Obama.
Amen.
You know,
Amen.
ordained for
Amen.
that time.
A blessing from God. All right, you know what we're going to do? We're going to play the second part of Gil Noble while we get Doc on the set. Doc, we got Gil coming up. So,
Hey.
all right. So.
The media's coverage of Malcolm versus the real deal.
It was awful. And so I learned about Malcolm, and I realized that I had been had. I realized that
You
I
had bought
missed.
what the media had told you.
Yes, I bought it, hook, line, and sinker. But when I heard Malcolm's entire presentation, everything fell in line, and it was logical. And it made me understand that there's no sin in being angry. In fact, if you're not angry, there's something wrong with you.
And why do you think Malcolm was killed?
I think there's
real issues.
I think that there are a number of reasons why he was killed. And it's a very, very painful reality that we need to deal with. He was a threat to America's global ambitions. He had done a lot in Africa to awaken the African countries and let them understand that they should not be victim of the courtship that American businesses were engaged in, the Peace Corps and all these things, because they don't love you. They want your minerals. If they did, look what they're doing to us, and we're your brothers and sisters. Look what they're doing to us in, you know, Mississippi and whatnot. And so many of them began to quote Malcolm on the floor of the United Nations, ironically. So I think that that's one dimension that the State Department, and they tried to kill him when he was in Egypt. They poisoned him, but he had his stomach pumped and he survived. So that was one dimension. Then there were the authorities here in this country that also wanted him to leave this life. And then there was a lot of factionalism within the Nation of Islam. And there was a lot of greed, there was a lot of ambitiousness, and there was a lot of friction, because the Nation of Islam had grown into an economic colossus.
And self-sufficiency.
They were self-sufficient.
The same things that your parents practiced.
Exactly. And they were a threat. They had their own schools. They had their own religion.
Food.
They had their own name, their own diet. They were self-sufficient. And that was a threat.
Big time.
And so I think that there are some people who were in the nation who, see, many of the people who had been fished by Malcolm into joining the nation had been on the street like he had. And a lot of them, as the money started to come in, some of the old temptations began to take over. I interviewed a man, Mchawi, in prison, and he told me that he thought that Malcolm was a hypocrite and that he was wrong in bad-mouthing Elijah. He told me this on camera. And he told me how they went about assassinating him and, you know, how determined they were to take him out.
He really believed it, you think?
Oh, he really did. He thought, and the more Malcolm protested, the angrier they became. And so he took me right through. He was one of the gunmen. He had a pistol, and he described how there were 3 gunmen. 1 had a rifle and 2 had pistols. He was one of the gunmen. The rifle went off first and struck down Malcolm, and then the 2 men with revolvers went up to the stage and emptied their revolvers. And he told me that he was convinced that he had done the right thing, you know. And I asked him, I said, in your life, have you ever so much as spat at a member of the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klan? Or did you ever smack one? And he dropped his head and he said, no.
Did he understand the meaning of that question, do you think?
I made it clear. But he said that it wasn't until years later, while in prison, that he came to understand that Malcolm was not lying, he was not wrong, and that there was corruption. And he had a nervous breakdown in prison because he realized that who he had taken off.
Yes, exactly.
You know, so I mean, this was just a very, very painful experience, and it's something that we are not yet wrestling with. I don't want to get overly philosophical, but I just wanted to respond to your question that Malcolm had a tremendous impact on me after he was dead.
Afterwards.
Yes, because after that, I became hungry to get this story and learn more about this extraordinary man. Alex Haley just came out with the book soon after the assassination. Got to know Alex, became very good friends, and I got to know Betty and the whole family, all of his, and so I began to fill out this cavity. I had this rich nourishment from Martin, but the cavity that my ignorance had created with Malcolm was beginning to be filled in. And then even more significant, I think, were the role that the students played.
Yes.
Because I think that that's something that today's students don't really understand.
You know, I love this piece because it's exactly how I was made aware of our heroes. You know, I was like Gil. I didn't know Malcolm. I didn't eat pork. I mean, I ate pork. I always get it mixed up. I mean, Sherman's barbecue, that was my favorite spot. Boy, that's when the meat used to fall off the bone. Oh, man. What, not eating pork? What, are you kidding? I mean, that was crazy to me. And then not fornicating, not chasing the girls in the 60s? What, are you kidding? I mean, this man was out of his mind. And I was a Baptist, so Malcolm was completely nuts to me. But only when I got to know Reverend Kenyatta. And this is just 15 years ago. And I sat down next to, you know, I heard Reverend Kenyatta tell me about Malcolm. How the most powerful thing about Malcolm was he was honest. And he left his ways and he just turned true blue to what he was. I mean, he had found his calling. And the disappointment of what his relationship with Elijah Muhammad, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and being a pedophile, you know, and that just crushed him. And we saw in the opening the Oxford piece where he says, I'll work with anybody. I don't care what color you are. So we see his elevation. Now, we have you here because we know you have all the archives of Gil, and you're a scholar yourself in your own right, and you teach us daily when you come here. So what's up now, Doc? What are we going to do with Jeff Sessions as Attorney General? This morning it happened.
Well, I think that's wonderful. White folks should be delusioned in terms of white power.
Okay.
But it's not a reality.
All right.
The 9/10 of the planet are people of color.
Okay.
And so they're going to be delusioned again.
Okay.
But I'm glad that you raised Gil because he's a very special spirit.
Yes.
He has a legacy of over 1,600 hours that needs to be somehow worked on so it can be part of the continuous education of African peoples. And I was glad to see Gil so intense in his, he had a very intense relationship in terms of Malcolm and what his death meant.
Right.
And so, and for him to relate to Alex Haley and to Betty, I related personally in that sense because I had a $500,000 grant to support Alex and Betty and I were very close because she was a professor at Medgar Evers. So we had that CUNY relationship plus her trying to raise these young girls. And these babies, two of the twins were actually in the womb when Malcolm was shot. But Malcolm was a special spirit. He brought a special message of a revolutionary struggle and transformation that is forever. And so the fact that he went through the various transformations coming from a strong foundation of a Garveyite movement, but then having that crushed when his father was murdered and mother hospitalized, he still was able to go through the negative transformation and the prison experience and the street experience, and then somehow to find the ability to fly like an eagle and soar. So it's a message for us. And Gil captured that. I'm glad that we all understood how important it was.
That's very. So what reason I'm playing all this is to find out what do we do now?
It's very easy.
Instead of the
we have to move into. I just had Powernomics, the book by Claude Anderson. A friend of mine called from California and said, "Do you know Claude Anderson?" I said, "I'm looking at the book that he produced," and so I got the book. But then the African Holy Ghost, our ancestors said, "Wait a minute, Dr. J, you need to pull together a book on Afronomics. In other words, how African peoples have to empower themselves." And so for me, the greatest lesson of this Trump experience is that we have to Africanize our lives, pure and simple, at every level that we can. And so we just go with that. It's a wake-up call. We thought integration with white folks. We've always thought that it would work for us. Clearly, we have to integrate with ourselves. And there's a global community representing 1 billion of us, and we got a couple of billion cousins that we need to see are necessary for our future. So Afronomics, I'm declaring now in this 80th year of my whirlwind experience on the planet, we've got to control the economics of our community. We've got to control the politics of a community, and we have to control the culture. That's Afronomics. And with that, we can run through the world like a whirlwind and change it.
No. Meanwhile, we got to deal with Sessions as Attorney General.
No, but the thing is, we've always had to deal with the system of white supremacy. We were dragged out of Africa and laid the foundations for the system of white supremacy's economics. And we've always had to deal with the contradictions of their politics. We became the people who became the standard of freedom, justice, and equality. And so it's nothing new. However, we did get a delusion of inclusion with the Obama presidency and what we thought all that meant. And clearly, it was not solidified because we did not have our own economic base, and we did not have a true political base that met our needs. And culturally, we were confused. Dr. Wade Noble said it best. Myself and Professor Smalls will be going to Detroit at the end of the month to deal with the Afro-American Great Museum there. And Wade Noble said it best: Africans everywhere suffer greatly from a shattered consciousness and a fractured identity. And so Afronomics will help us clarify that consciousness and that identity. And see, we are the founding peoples of the universe. We have the richest continent of the universe. We are the strongest spirits on the universe. How can we go through a process of dehumanization for hundreds of years and we're still rising? So we have to have what I'm calling Afronomics. So you have the pleasure of having Dr. Jeffries for the first time in his 80 years announced what we have to do.
But we're still
get our
fighting
economics
amongst
and
each
politics
other.
together.
Yep, you
But
know,
we're still fighting amongst each other.
Because our minds have been messed over. You have an example here of all four of us understand the importance of the mind. And Gil was manifesting that. So when you Africanize the mind, your behind will follow. Africanize the mind, and you'll have your African behind in the right direction.
You know, like we say, you know, the first issue is identity. And that's where we fall down.
Yes.
That we don't know who we are.
Right.
And we don't identify ourselves correctly. You know, so some people say, well, you know, I'm a Negro, and others will say I'm black, and others will say I'm African, and others will say I'm just a blood, you know.
Right.
So we have to first deal with the question of identity. We used to say in our organization, the East, we needed to deal with identity, we need to then deal with purpose, and then direction. Those were the things. But right now, we have to revisit identity. We felt back in the late 60s, the early 70s, that we had solved the problem.
That's right.
You know, that we were fine. Yeah, we know that, you know, we're African people. No, we don't know that we're African people, and especially these younger generations.
We got, we got
really
two
confused.
suits and two Africans.
I was looking at that earlier.
And we have two lights and two darks. And we're still fighting amongst each other.
And we're caught up in the delusion of inclusion. And so we really had to have a liberating process. And I think this is the time for it. I mean, when I saw, and I hate to give a shout out from my family, when I was at the state of the congressional district with Hakeem Jeffries, the congressman,
Okay.
and I saw him address the circumstances that our people are in, not his Congress, but the phenomena of Trump. It was the most liberating thing to see him stand there and make his statement to the world. And he can't take it back. It's there that we have to resist. And the rise of the resistance is the key to what we're all about. And then a couple of days later, I was at my family church in New Jersey, Metropolitan Baptist Church. And the preacher had called me and said, make sure you come because Reverend Dr. Calvin O. Butts is going to be speaking. Dr. Calvin O. Butts made the most fantastic presentation I have ever seen coming out of the pulpit. And I will say that, and I will get you a copy. Yes, okay. Close your mouth because you look like you.
No.
It was the most phenomenal thing for him to give the story of his life. Yes, but he had to go through hell to get to the status of Boulay. So he knew what it was to try to Africanize and the difficulty he had. But I'm sorry, his statement stands for itself. Hakeem's statement stands for itself. I actually made a statement at one of our celebrations last week, which came out of me. So I wish I had all three of those statements. In fact, I'm going to get all three of those statements and put them together.
Please.
Doc, you always...
The struggle continues.
Well, you know, we had a struggle you getting here today.
And then you're going to have...
We sit here, we presented Gil, and
yes.
We have a minute to go.
Well, but we have this history.
Okay.
And I have with me, I'll be speaking tonight at the United UAM, and I have the Jeffries speech at Harvard, where I stood where Malcolm stood 30 years before. And it's my most important statement to the world.
Okay.
And then we went to Holland, and then the Dutch had to be taken on. And so I have those two tapes that I'm going to push and show people how important it is. So I'm glad just that the Creator gave me the minutes here.
Well, again, thank you for coming, Doc, Basir, and of course, the power to the people. The God in me loves the God in you. Stay tuned for more of the Gilchrist Experience. Happy Black History Month. Every month is Black History Month.
Read a book.
Really.
Hey, yes.
Power to the people.
And study the scholar, not just taking his words, but taking his life. And